no gavel, so.
Oh, it's in the box.
We do.
The mini gavel.
Okay, we'll call the Tuesday, January 15th, 2019 meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order. I remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded, and we all hope that the new year came in happy and healthy for everyone. First up, warrant 1914 and 1915.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On warrant 1914, which was the beginning of the new year, we had on the payroll side $708,062, and on the bills payable side $779,434. Items of note under, about halfway down, under fire department, $21,277 for communications equipment. That's converting phones from copper to fiber, as well as work for the repeater system. We had $437,723 for purchase of power for MELD, and then down near the bottom for the under the police department, $35,744 for a new cruiser. This is the third of the three that were approved last year at town meeting. This is the chief's vehicle. The existing chief's vehicle will go back to the jail, and then I think there's one more that goes back to the jail sometime after July 1 of 2019. So, on warrant 1915, for this week's warrant, on the payroll side, $708,024, and on the bills payable, $792,446. Of that, about $12,825 in waste disposal and $2,968 in recycling, $178,294 in purchase of power for MELD, and then a number of school charges for tuitions and transportation, and then also some work at the Fuller Meadow Playground. So that came in at $68,006. CFO Sarah Wood has reviewed this and asks the board's approval of the warrants.
Are there any questions?
Just so we're clear, the warrant number 1914, we had delegated your approval for that. So do we have to take an affirmative vote on that delegation from, or did that already?
Well, we typically vote them anyways, even though they get signed.
Okay, I move we approve warrant number 1914 and 1915. 1914 that had been approved previously.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Then we have the minutes of the December 18th meeting.
Wasn't here.
I move we approve the minutes from December 18th.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I abstained from the vote as I wasn't present.
Okay. Andy, Town Administrator, updates and reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of things tonight, mostly budget-related. Sarah Wood, Tanya, and I have been meeting with departments to review the initial budget requests. That process, the initial meeting process, is concluding this week, and then we'll start to put things together and develop the budget that the board and the finance committee will be reviewing. Well, the board doesn't really need a reminder, but for the public's benefit, the all-day budget meeting is Saturday, February 2nd, beginning at 8:30 a.m. Here at the Fuller Meadow Library, continuing till sometime in the afternoon, mid to late afternoon. So we are planning. I think I mentioned this at the December meeting. We've compressed our budget meeting schedule, our internal budget meeting schedule, a little bit, to give Sarah some more time at the back end to put things together. So we hope to be able to pull things together and get the books in electronic form, primarily to the board members and the finance committee members, a little bit earlier than we typically do. I think when I first got here, you got them the day before, and we've been trying to get a little earlier, move a little bit sooner on that to give you a chance to review them. So hoping to continue that. We'll do them electronically unless somebody asks for a paper copy.
That's something else I wanted, to mention, to the public, that, it's, we call them budget books, but it's not physical paper anymore for most of us.
So if anybody does want paper, we can certainly do that. Just let us know. We have a limited number of Chromebooks, and I know a couple of you bring your own devices anyways. Anybody that can bring their own device, I know Richard typically brings his, but if you have one laying around that you can bring, it might help us to get through the day. We've still got a lot of unknowns in the operating budget for, at this point in time, which is always the way it is. We'll get a little bit more clarity later in this week. Tim and Rick and Tanya and I and some other staff are going to the MMA meeting on Friday and Saturday. We'll hear from the governor on Friday, get the governor's budget, which clearly will change when the House and the Senate start to look into it. However, generally the governor's budget is sort of the baseline for what we can expect for local aid and school aid and things like that. So that'll change, and we'll continue to update as much as we can prior to the February 2nd meeting and as time goes on after that. Similarly, health insurance, I think I had told you previously, we budgeted 10% at the suggestion of Maya. We'll get some more clarity this weekend from Maya. They released their range on Saturday, I think it is, and either late Friday or Saturday. So we'll get a snapshot of where we are, if 10% is even in the range. Maybe 10% is too high. Hopefully it's not too low. And then we'll get our formal renewal and know what the final number is sometime roughly in the middle of March. So certainly by the time we go to print, we should have a solid health insurance number for next year. And then finally, I posted a video last night on Facebook describing the budget process and all we've been going through over the last month or so, as well as what the board and the finance committee will be doing over the coming weeks and actually the coming months. And also some of the 3 meeting dates, joint meeting dates, and opportunities for people to get involved, whether it's active involvement or just watching. So that's it's on Facebook. It's only about 3.5 minutes, and then any meeting information is available on the town's website. That's all I've got for tonight.
Any questions? All right. In continuing with updates, I'll provide some updates about things that are happening at Masco. Back on December 12th, the school committee, interviewed, 2 finalists for superintendent. Neither one of them was deemed to be an excellent fit for the district, so the school committee chose to re-examine, the applicant pool with the assistance of the search consultant, Glenn Kuchar of the Mass Association of School Committees. And that re-examination yielded, 2 people that were considered to be moved forward. One chose to drop out, so on February 7th, it is an interview with Dr. Michael Harvey is scheduled. He is the current superintendent at Hamilton Wenham, and he's been there for 7 years. So that's one update. Following on the budget information, last year at this time, we expected an enrollment shift of about 1% against, Middleton for this upcoming budget cycle. It actually came in at about half that because, Boxford and Topsfield ended up with more students than anticipated, whereas Middleton stayed, the same. And, looking forward over the next couple of years, our enrollment percentage should decrease in each of those years. As far as the budget subcommittee is, working on, requests and information. The Masco budget isn't released to the public until February 11th, which is after our operating budget meeting on February 2nd. There are some pressures, for increases. The transportation contract is up for renewal, and typically in the first year of a renewal, there is a big increase and then minor increases the remainder. The teacher contract is also up for renewal, as well as the food service contract. On a positive note, there is expected about 6 retirements of teachers who will then be replaced by teachers on the lower end of the scale, which provides some savings. And also at the last teacher contract negotiations, a new salary grid was adopted that compresses some of the steps and columns, and we are now yielding about half the step and column increases on a yearly basis prior to the adoption of that grid, as more teachers are bound to that grid as they come on to the district. So that, is what's happening at the moment. There should be some further information and clarity by the February 2nd meeting, but it won't be the final, number, because the budget is still being worked on.
So not even the thumbnail at that point?
That should be available.
Okay.
But, that is still not,
Something, but not much.
Breathing.
I'll say it.
we will not use that term.
Thank you.
All right, are there any, and one other thing, one of our residents, Teresa and Stephen Bono, donated $60,000 to the Masco to enhance teacher professional development over the coming 2 years. So we thank them for that generous gift. Any questions or comments? Okay. We stretched as far as we can, so now we'll move to our first agenda item. We had invited our legislative delegation, which is composed of Senator Bruce Starr, Representative Brad Jones, and Representative Ted Spiliotis. Bruce Starr is running late as usual, so we will start with our representatives. Welcome and thank you for coming.
He just wanted to make an entrance. Yeah,
Good. Just in time, Bruce.
All rise.
I was waiting to make sure I came in at the right time.
You know what I said?
I'll get between the two. I'll get between the two of you.
So, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to come and talk with us. At this time of year, everyone is working on budgets, and there's always budget pressures for everyone, you at the state, us at the local level. And at the local level, education takes up 65% of our budget. So, the education aid, the foundation formula, funding for education make a significant, difference to our community. So would one of you like to talk about the prospects of more money for education at the state level?
You're the closest.
Oh, thanks. All right, do you want me to use the microphone, or do you want me to?
It'll catch you right where you are. You don't even have to
Okay,
get up.
great. So the good news is that over the last few years, we have had some improvements in the funding for education, and that's largely reflective of the fact that we've had increases in state revenue. And really, we started to see some major changes last year because we started to see really the second component of the economic recovery kick in. And by that, I mean, we had been seeing some very good unemployment numbers, but we had not been seeing the kind of growth in revenue over the last few years that you would expect to accompany those numbers. What started to change, and what we really started to see the benefit of last year, was the issue, not that people were employed, but that they were seeing the kind of wage growth, which also usually accompanies an economic recovery. And so with that, we started to see some pretty substantial increases over benchmark at the state level in our revenue. And we collectively, and particularly on the North Shore, as a legislative delegation more broadly, made the argument that when we saw those increases in revenue, we should first respond to the promises that we had already made to fund things before we started to spend that funding on new things. And so on the North Shore, there was a movement where a number of us wrote to the Senate President and the Speaker of the House and suggested that we should do exactly that and keep those commitments. And largely those things did get reflected in the state budget that we passed. And in fact, I brought some documentation of that, but the important thing is that we started to see some movement, for instance, on the special education circuit breaker, where we saw in the current year's budget full funding of that. We saw an increase in regional school transportation, which is very important, and I know it's very important here because of Masconomet. And we saw some other increases as well that were reflective of that commitment, again, to things that had already been promised, as opposed to new things that we'd all like to spend money on, but would be abandoning our commitment. And so the prospect of that happening again this year, I think is very good, that we may see some increases. I would never encourage anyone on my own part to budget for an increase. I think it's always better to try to use a level funded number and then experience a windfall rather than a shortfall. But that being said, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that we would see some increases coming this year. I know that all of us have been committed to those kinds of things, particularly in things that don't necessarily depend on the Chapter 70 formula. And the reason that I say that is because oftentimes over the years, we've seen money get poured into the Chapter 70 formula, but have not seen great results at the local level because of the way the money flows through the formula to the cities and towns. So oftentimes, we collectively work on things that don't depend on that formula. And that's why the special education circuit breaker is a good example. It does not depend in which school district you're in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, what you get for reimbursement. It's always going to be 75% above 4 times the foundation budget. So when we work on that, it tends to have more of a leveraged effect for the people that we represent. The same is true of regional school transportation. Now, all of that being said, there is in the legislature a bit of an 800-pound gorilla. And the 800-pound gorilla is that we know over the last number of years, there has been a growing gap between what the foundation budget determines you should receive and the actual cost of educating a student. And that largely is due to the fact that the foundation budget was supposed to be reviewed when we first passed the law in 1993 every few years. The fact is, it really hasn't been reviewed up until about 2015, when we fought to establish what was already in the law, which was a Foundation Budget Review Commission. We got that. And now we have a set of recommendations. And numerically, those recommendations tell us that the current foundation budget underfunds education in Massachusetts at the K through 12 level at somewhere between $1 and $2 billion with a B dollars. So one of the things that we have to do is try to make those changes. It's unlikely that it will happen all at once. In fact, we have been chipping away a little bit at it, particularly because of Governor Baker's leadership with regard to the cost of health insurance, because the 2 primary recommendations that the FBRC made were that we need to address health insurance and we need to address the cost of special education. And by special education, I do not mean the circuit breaker. The circuit breaker is for the extraordinary costs of education. But there's another problem. And the problem is that for students that don't reach that 4 times the foundation budget, the foundation budget under assumes how many students are in special education. So it needs to be changed to reflect what actual student populations look like, not what the budget presumes that they will look like. And the folks that wrote the Chapter 70 formula initially, if they were here tonight, would tell you the number they used was aspirational. They hoped over time to reduce that student population by doing other things. It didn't happen. So addressing those two things is very important as well for every district. Now, I would be the first to argue that the Foundation Budget Review Commission, in my humble opinion, did half the job. It looked at the adequacy of the formula, or inadequacy, but did not look at the inequities as between communities. And the hope is, and I've offered a bill, and I know that Brad and Ted are thinking in the same way, that we ought never again go 25 years without the foundation budget being reviewed. It ought to be 3 years, 5 years at the most. But right now, we've got this challenge in front of us to try to close that gap. And if we can close that gap, to answer your question in a very roundabout way, Mr. Chairman, if we can close that gap, then there is a prospect for additional funding as well. Now, last year, the House and the Senate passed bills to do this. The House had one version, the Senate had another version, and without getting into the differences, suffice it to say that we could not reconcile those differences. I am confident that we are going to be at it again, and one of the reasons I know that is because a number of legislators have filed something called the Promise Act to address what I just described. I find it interesting that they're calling the Promise Act, which is what we have been saying about funding the initial promise, but hopefully we'll be able to get to that. So if you look at the numbers for Masconomet or for Middleton for the elementary schools, you will see last year there were some modest increases, just as there were for unrestricted general government aid. Hopefully we can produce that again. But if we can address some of the inequities in the foundation budget formula, then hopefully there could be some more. Now, I'm going to stop and take a breath, because I know you did not expect an answer that long. And
Oh, yes, we did. Now, when you talked about, special education, one of the things that is happening, throughout the state is that the percentage of the population needing special education services is growing. Now, at, Masco, it's gone from 14 to 18%. Now, the number of cases hasn't changed. It's the population enrollment has declined. But it's still a valid point that a higher percentage of the smaller population still needs services throughout the state.
Bruce was talking about was that the assumed percentage would be a higher. So you said it went from 14 to 18. I think the proposal is 16. Right. So that would better represent what the actual experience is. And Ted, if you want to jump in, but I was going to add a couple things on what Bruce said in terms of sort of the macro perspective. A couple things we were dealing with was a structural deficit in the budget. So even though we did a bunch of one-time things that I know cities and towns do occasionally when circumstances arise that have to when you have to do that. They're not necessarily best budgeting. They're not necessarily things you want to do, but they're the things you dig into when you can't make the ends meet. We had to do that, and we've gotten away from that. We've kind of erased the structural deficit. And then part of that was draining down our rainy day fund, which we've now had the opportunity to get back up to, I think it's just over $2 billion now. So still not maybe an ideal budgeting number in terms of where we should be based on the size of our budget, but a lot closer to where it was at its peak than when we'd gone down quite a bit. So those are sort of two things that we were also working through. And in the previous 2 years, in FY '17, FY '18, mid-year, both the House and Senate had passed budgets based on an assumed revenue figure that ended up cratering. So the agreed number ended up having to be reduced basically by the conference committee. This didn't happen this year, which put us in a better situation. And in fact, revenues came in ahead, which I think you even saw in the final deficiency, an additional allocation towards Chapter 90 of cash. I think it was $30 million on top of the $200 million distribution. A couple things that didn't happen, though, is in each of those circumstances, the numbers that we had built into our budget, I think around local aid, really held up. One of the things the governor had committed to, and I'm hopeful that I believe he's going to continue on, is that the rate of growth that we agreed to through consensus revenue would be applied to unrestricted local aid. So in the past, in FY '17, '18, even though the revenue figure declined, he said, we're not going to touch that. We're not going to say, well, we budgeted 3%, it's really only 1%, we'll go nick that. He left it alone. So this year's number, I think, is 2.7%. So hopefully that'll apply to the UGA number, and we'll obviously grow that by 2.7 would be probably about $35, $40 million or so.
And on that point, I appreciate it, because if you look at the unrestricted local aid versus the whole conversation we just had on education, I mean, step back and look at Middleton, where, education, both Masconomet Regional, Essex North Shore, and Middleton Elementary combined is a substantial percentage of our overall budget. And 08, 09, when the original crater happened, and then digging out of that, I mean, we're still seeing a local aid number that's down overall. Some of that is education, but the difference is on our municipal side of the ledger, so to speak, we're still at a point where we're trying to play catch-up for many of the items that we basically deferred over a long period of time. We've been able to get some staffing level changes. For example, our Public Works Department last year, we added a new FTE. It was probably the first time we've added an FTE to the Public Works Department probably since the 70s. And you can just imagine the number of roadways that have expanded in this town from the 70s till then. So the unrestricted local aid, huge, a big thank you to the three of you and the governor for the roadway Chapter 90 dollars. That's allowed us to do a lot of things that we probably would have had to dig elsewhere for. I mean, I think the roads in this town are in pretty decent shape compared to some other communities around us. But I really want to, the savings or the focus on the Chapter 70 dollars, don't change that. I mean, I think the bigger debate, as you said, is the 800-pound gorilla, which is it's not the increase in dollars overall, it's the inequities between certain communities. And I think every community can stand up and say, we've been treated in a way that wasn't fair. But in the end, I understand that it's going to be a count of votes in the chambers based on districts where, urban, suburban, rural, and I get that clearly. Just don't forget on the municipal side. So, the agreement that has been made with the legislature and the governor to continue in that percentage for unrestricted. I mean, a 2.5% of unrestricted local aid is not a huge amount of money to Middleton, but other than the mid-90s when the cap was removed on the
Lottery.
on the lottery dollars, we really were seeing the same numbers from the 80s.
Right. And then they get rolled up and put together additional assistance and lottery revenue. The other thing I would mention, that there was a lot of focus in early January on December's numbers, and they kind of cratered a little bit in terms of revenues. And pretty much the experience, or the general consensus is that is an effect of the federal tax law, or people saying, I'm not going to get the state and local tax deduction, so instead of sending my payment in before the 1st, I'll wait until the 15th of January and keep it in my own personal bank account for a few more weeks. So hopefully we'll see that shift from December to January, and it'll ultimately be a net wash.
Yeah, with transportation, one of the challenges that all school systems are facing is, the consolidation, in the bus, industry. There are fewer and fewer companies out there, to bid, and therefore it drives up the cost of transportation. You know, if there's anything that can be done to encourage more competition, you know, in that industry, I think it would go a long ways toward, you know, mitigating cost increases.
There's a commission actually looking at the cost of school transportation right now to see if there are ways that we might be able to improve. More from a cost savings perspective, as opposed to just increasing funding. And I'm sure that's a big part of it, is the lack of competition causing a price increase.
One of the other projects that we're working on is, you know, the Maple Street Route 62 corridor, and, you know, the funding for the bridge repair and, you know, the whole roadway repair. And I know you guys have been helpful, you know, so far, and we wish you to continue pushing that so that that project can come to, you know, fruition.
So we're, as part of that, we're halfway there.
That's right.
We have it in the so-called DCAM bond bill, in the amount of, I believe, $250,000. And I know, as Brian knows, we have to now work very hard to get the administration to release that as part of the capital spending plan. But we aren't starting from zero. We have, over the last couple of years, been engaged in a lot of advocacy with the administration about the particular issues on Maple Street, the increased usage, for instance, attributable to the sports center, and the revitalization of the ag school campus and tech school. I have to be careful to say both. So we have been in a conversation, and actually Selectman Crest has been in a way a point person on that, to say that we definitely can make the case that this is not only a local priority. When you look at the utilization pattern, it's a regional priority. So we have to work together, and what we should do next, and in my opinion, I suspect my colleagues would share this, is to start to make a collective appeal to get it in the capital spending plan, which will likely be released sometime between May and June.
Now, I appreciate that a lot, and, you know, the advocacy that all three of you have done as we've worked through trying to figure out alternatives for this. I mean, it's one of the major bottlenecks, not just in town, but it affects Danvers, Linfield, up and down 114, in between. Add to that, you know, while most of that area, Route 62, is fully built out, I understand that there's not a lot of other alternatives to access dollars through Max Works or other programs like that. But I just, you know, not lost on any of you three, but as you're advocating for that, please remind the Commonwealth, and specifically the bonding agency, that between a jail, a new school, a DYS facility, that were all built with state dollars, that really, if it was a private developer building any of those, there would have been mitigations that would have had to happen due to traffic, roadway improvements, sidewalks improvements. You know, you talk about the cost of transportation. One of the reasons why we want to see that roadway updated is to actually make the investments on sidewalks on Maple Street that would lead right to one of our schools. You know, there's literally only a handful of kids in this town that actually can walk to a school, and that's those that live right behind this building, that literally walk through the backyard to get here. And we've done a lot in this town on walkability efforts, and our town planner has been fabulous on those items. Now we're at the point of, no pun intended, where the rubber meets the road. So not lost on any of you three. You guys have been really good advocates on this, but I think that's the linchpin of getting the administration to understand releasing these dollars, even just for the single improvement at Liberty Street intersection, is really a way of their hopefully understanding that these major facilities that they've built in our community need to be reflective in the roadway.
I mean, in terms of the, if I can, in terms of the two state roads we have, that really, you know, makes up a third of our, you know, thoroughfares between Route 62 and Route 114. And not to pile on, but not to mention that, primary route for most people in the area, particularly, for medical services, whether it's going over to Beverly or going with Peabody, so just want to bring that up too.
Let me just chime in on that. I'm not exactly sure the status here, but a few months ago, Lieutenant Governor was on the North Shore. He issued an award of about $172,000, not in that fund we were talking about, in the Complete Streets program, to kind of, and Andy and I were able to put a little plug in to say that it would be good to couple that with the environmental bond to make, so she made a point with all the other cities and towns present to point out how that's an approach that ought to be taken, not just by Middleton, but by everyone. So she used us as an example of ways to, bundle up some funding
And
if you
quite
can't
honestly,
get one
couple
big
that-
amount.
And then, yet again, couple that with when that bridge finally gets rebuilt that has failed, or failing, hasn't completely failed, going over the Ipswich River right there, will talk about coupling. I mean, we're gonna do work to the Liberty Street intersection. We're trying to do improvements on Route 62. There's gonna be a portion that's gonna be done, albeit some federal dollars, on the bridge replacement. The ability to cobble together, and I wanna be clear, we're not here with our hat out saying, give me, give me, give me. The town's surely willing to invest in this as well. We're not saying this is your road, not ours. This is our road, as quite honestly, as much as the state's. And we're willing to make that investment alongside, but the reality is we just don't have the financial ability to make the full investment.
We also, not to open up a can of worms or anything, but we were on
you
the.
do best it.
I know, and then step back, that's mean. But we were on the campus of the Aggie Vote the other day as a delegation, and one thing that was quite clear is the demand is incredibly great, as positive as anyone could possibly ever see. I think it's something like 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 3 kids are not able to get in. And there's already talk about expansion of programs and things on that campus. And so it's not something that, it's not a fair comment any longer to say that we're built out. There's chance that there's gonna be more and more discussion of what to do with the buildings that in the original proposal for the school were to be demolished, but that was the funding that was cut back. So now, that the school's entering this phase and the new administration, they're starting to look and say, oh gee, what can we do to utilize these buildings that are drastically underutilized? So that's gonna add, we won't be seeing a decrease in traffic in that area.
That you mentioned, facilities, we're, in the next few years, the town needs to begin addressing some of its public safety and, senior facilities. And one of the challenges is the high cost of public construction. People that are in the private sectors, you tell them, you're gonna build a building of this size and it's gonna cost this much. They say, private sector can, build it for 65 to 70% of that. Things that can be done to lower the cost of public construction while maintaining the integrity of, of the law and fairness, et cetera, needs to be, looked at, because, spending money just to have X, Y, and Z, each checking on each other, doesn't ultimately provide any tangible benefit to the taxpayers. So any sort of discussion like that in the legislature, that any changes would be appreciated.
Well, what's really being discussed in the school building aspect especially, which is, 80% of your role, is the fact that the sales tax isn't keeping up with the demand. Even though we have, as a state, declining enrollment, we still have a huge demand on school building. And I know you folks are pretty well, have done your job, but but other communities have not. And the treasurer is starting to put on a strong push for us to look at her funding source for school building, and saying, quite frankly, as strongly as anyone has done in 10 or 15 years, saying, hey, we're just not getting the dollars we once received from, like anyone, from the sales tax, and therefore not able to meet anywhere close to demand. So that kind of goes hand in hand with that.
So as you probably know, we're embarking on an effort with an acquisition of some land in town with what will be a long-term plan to update what I call our municipal facilities, which is a fire station that doesn't fit the equipment we own, a police station that we got from the town of Danvers for $1 and added 2 former modular school units to it, or as I tell the chief, we gave him a double wide, attached it to his police station. A senior center that, I'll say it, I think is an embarrassment for the senior population in this town. And, you know, while this town has graciously invested in, taxpayers have graciously invested in updates to this building, a new elementary school, and I think the jewel in the town, which is the library in the center of town, and then add to that a town hall facility that was the high school back
1860.
1860.
And has newspaper for insulation.
So I'm sure that's fireproof. So, given that, we're about ready to embark on at least the development of a plan if town meeting gives us approval to purchase this land, albeit we're not going to build as rapidly as some people may think we are planning on building. It's going to be a slow, methodical, and rational plan, but it's going to put, yet again, another burden on the community. So to Costa's point, I'm not saying here, hey, please repeal prevailing wage. I mean, that has about as much of a chance of passing in the legislature than, I don't know, anything, or nothing. But I think of providing the ability to give cities and towns some ability on building to, so we are not at such a competitive disadvantage, especially in a town like this that is going to embark on a 20 to 30-year plan to start aggressively but smartly improving its facilities, so.
So I think we understand sort of the magnitude of what you're trying to tackle. I think the land acquisition that you're faced with is a very important strategic opportunity, probably one that will not be present again for a very long time, if
Probably
ever.
not in our lifetime.
So trying to navigate that and then install modules to address the different things that you described, I think is a really interesting process. And hopefully we can work with you together to try to make sure that resources are available as those projects unfold over, I would assume, at least the next decade. But your point about cost containment and cost reduction is also well taken. And so there are things that I think we could look at just right out of the gate with regard to helping to make sure anything that's constructed is energy efficient and does not cost as much to operate as its predecessors. Trying to use any kind of tools that we have toward, bulk purchase of things, or aggregating construction projects, or using common design. There are a lot of things we could do. Obviously, the one that everyone refers to is the prevailing wage law, and I agree with your assessment that it's the
You don't have to be a political
probability
scholar to figure that out.
of repeal is not going to be
Well,
anytime
the voters
soon.
had an opportunity a long, long time ago and said,
And said no.
Yeah.
So, in that vein, we're looking to put this future complex right into the heart of 114, which is going to entail not just construction on property that hopefully the voters and taxpayers allow us to purchase and plan for, but access to a state thoroughfare that would likely require some roadway improvements. So I'm just, again, planting
I
a
mean,
seed.
I would say, I think that once you get through town meeting and, hopefully a successful.
Post-town
vote.
meeting, if we're successful, it won't just be the acquisition, it'll be the development of a master plan for that.
Right, and then to say, okay, what's that, and then what pieces, depending on how you phase or sequence it, can maybe the state partner and say, okay, roadway, yeah, we can do that, or maybe there's other grant money, or maybe multi-year effort, because I think you're right, that it doesn't sound like it's something that's gonna be like, oh yeah, 2 years from now, this is all gonna be built, it's just, it's
Some folks
long
in
range.
town that are afraid that's gonna be the
Right.
case,
No.
but it's not gonna be a reality.
You know, can I just take a minute, because I didn't say anything about the inequity aspect of Chapter 70, only because everybody likes to say, oh, we haven't changed anything in 25 years or whatever, but really, we did. These two gentlemen take a lot of credit for it. Back just before the recession, we tried to address the inequities.
Target share.
And I have an interesting district that I love to say that representing a small community, a medium-sized town, and a fairly, substantial-sized city gives me the opportunity to see all the sides up close and personal. And at that time, Topsfield saw something, when I was representing Topsfield, saw almost 100% increase in their Chapter 70 money in 1 year. And Peabody was found to be about 18% above what they're supposed to be. So over the next 5 or 6 years, they got 0 increase. And Topsfield had this huge increase of dollars that, that really was extremely beneficial for a small town like Topsfield, but made the effort to address inequities really well worth it. And it all came about, if you remember, because all of the towns that were below that foundation base, whatever the terminology, they gathered together and they said, hey, whatever you do, you have to address us. And it succeeded. And to me, at least, it succeeded in my district because Peabody had to see a huge reduction. Danvers saw no difference, none, 0. There was no increase, there was no decrease. It just continued on the same path. And Topsfield, and it all came, and these gentlemen understand it better than me, on whether it's property value or income and all that. We don't need to get into it tonight, but I really think that this is the year that there seems to be momentum built by, quite frankly, the Republican Party and people like two Brads on the North Shore and Bruce that really led the charge to have this foundation looked at and created the commission in 2015. And to me, it would really be a lost opportunity if you let this foundation debate go on without some type of a coalition of small, I don't know, what exists out there, but there certainly must exist a group within Mass Municipal of communities under 6,000 or under 10,000 that can get together and say, what is the commonality that makes that happen? Because that was a huge windfall that, like I described, almost once in a lifetime.
I liken this year sort of like the Venn diagram where somebody's talking about something and somebody else isn't. And this year, everybody's kind of circling around this issue.
Right.
Doesn't mean there's agreement on exactly what should be done. But
Right.
the governor's going to file, I think, companion legislation with his budget, addressing it beyond what he's already done. He's done some small pieces of it in funding, but I think in a bigger way. I think his goal is to do something that is pragmatic and sustainable, and not to jump on the legislation's name, but not to make a promise that then is next
Right.
year an unfulfilled promise. Rather make you a half a promise and keep it than a whole promise and neglect it. And I think that helps you budgeting and planning wise. And there are a couple things that are always tough. If you're a community that for a lot of years was always seeing enrollment growth, by the time the enrollment factored in the formula using the thing, you were always sort of chasing your tail. And yet, if you saw declining enrollment, you were kind of always held harmless. So you were kind of inoculated from it, because let's face it, it's difficult politically to say, I got less money than last year. You might be able to sell level funding, and that's a dynamic that's gone on, and it is very tough to get away from.
Any other
Just one last point, while we've got you here, and really what started this board's interest in having you come before us. So, as you know, the Secretary of State has proposed the potential of expanding early voting to state primaries. And while I'd say overall early voting has been a success, I can tell you it surely has been in this town. It hasn't been without a cost and a burden on the town. I give our town clerk, Eileen Twist, and her staff a lot of credit for, the hardy band of, I can't say employees because they're at best volunteers that are paid very poorly, that man our polling booths on election day have now spread that out over multiple days as we're jammed in the part of the conference room at the library. And the expansion to early voting in the primary, while I would not be opposed to, again, because it's been a successful, just please, I know the legislature and the state auditor had pushed really hard last time as an unfunded
They
mandate.
just finished a certification recently, and I think Middleton's due to get like 5,500
We
reimbursement.
greatly appreciate that. I think in the end, the voters have won on this, but I'd like to just put the plug in that, any push on that, please.
Yep, no, I think there's agreement on that.
And when you say success, I just want to make sure, that success, not more people voted.
It's a tremendous
Right.
convenience.
Yeah.
It's just convenient. So
Right.
the cost went up without really getting any more people to vote.
Right.
It's nice and easy, but, if the success was to get more people to vote, it really hasn't done that, but
I know
it's.
that-
I don't know if the increased voters that actually did happen was due to the climate or the early voting, but.
Convenience and climate, yes, together, I think combined. But I know when Andy and I talked about, one of the issues was concern about viability of this is the voting space
Right.
going forward because of traffic and congestion. And I know there's some talk of legislation that would maybe, if
Yes.
passed, would expand opportunities for Middleton to consider maybe a
right.
couple other opportunities.
That would be great. That would be-
Yeah, there was a bill last year, and it sounds to me like the legislature just ran out of time in the session. It was House Bill 382.
Yep.
And I heard that it was reintroduced, or
It'll
it
be
was,
refiled, yeah. I think it's Dave Nagle's bill. and-
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Representative Nangle, and he is refiling it.
okay.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
that's awesome. That's awesome, great.
And I know you and I talked about a couple locations, but it's at least an issue for a community that's, had a lot of growth and obviously seen a lot more voters that had, 20 years
It'll
ago.
also, sort of ties back to our facilities issues. We have 2 large precincts in Middleton. I don't know how the precincts got drawn so big, frankly.
I do. It was done legislatively.
Started with one.
Thank you to them.
Somebody
We
calls
gave
about
up, right.
legislation.
Because the state at the time wanted us to have 3 precincts, which one of them would have been predominantly residents that could never vote because they happened to be behind bars.
There was early voting.
I don't know that we'll be so,
Only need early release.
and early
I don't know that we'll be so lucky in the redistricting that follows the 2020 census, so I think, our expectation is that, and the town clerk's expectation is that we'll have a 3rd precinct, and there's no physical way we could do 3 precincts here. And that's where that House Bill 382 would really benefit us just to give us some flexibility and some additional options.
Do you do, I should know this, but do you do the early voting? Where does that take place? In the town hall?
For the presidential, we did it at Town Hall,
Right.
and it was pretty snug and not very, very disruptive. The most recent election in November, we did at the library. And that worked better, but it's also an imposition on the library because they can't use that
And
space.
They have a lot of day
2 weeks.
things that they just couldn't run, that they normally run, that people like and kids like, and.
And parking.
And parking, yeah.
My guess is the next presidential election, we'll see a healthy turnout.
I would bet.
All right.
Before we leave the topic of early voting, I just want to, because I know he won't say it, but Brad has been a real leader, and with Ted's support in the House at making sure that communities get funded for the cost of early voting, and that's borne some fruit. I would also point out that I'm going to refile again this year a bill that would make it statutorily required that you always get paid for early voting, so it isn't contingent on a particular budget or whatever.
I might say it was timely too, I think, for us as well. It was, looking back that fall, we didn't,
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to come talk to us, and I will leave you with my standard point. Please don't forget the funding for the Community Preservation Act.
I was waiting for that. Waiting for that, which we used for the library.
Yes.
There's also a push for that as
First
well.
communities in the Commonwealth, one of the first, yep.
Yeah, I think we hold the state record between adoption and first appropriation, 2 weeks.
Wow.
So,
Glad I voted for it.
I am going to leave behind, I'll leave behind some documentation for everything we said, just so you can know it was accurate.
Thank you very much.
That makes it accurate, that's okay.
It's in print.
documented, let me put it that way.
It's a supporting document.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, glad all three of you guys are
When we get
back.
through to the next,
Appreciate it.
next
Thank
phase
you.
of planning of the acquisition and development.
Yeah, so we have a March
let's
special town meeting.
Maybe have a
We'll know
workshop,
after that.
brainstorm.
Right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
good night. We're going to jump to item 6 on the agenda. That's the vote to appoint John Erickson to the Masconomet Regional School District Capital Advisory Committee. This is a committee that will be composed of 3 school committee members, 1 from each town, and 3 representatives, 1 from each town, to discuss issues surrounding the capital assets and the funding for maintaining them and renewing them.
I make such a motion.
I second such a motion, and I welcome you for doing this. I couldn't think of a guy that, or a person that would be better for it. I mean, you understand as well, if not sometimes more in depth on what's going on over there than sometimes I think the administration does. So I appreciate your stepping up to do this. It's not going to be an easy lift. So I second that.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks very much.
And I can stop in at the clerk's office to get sworn in.
Costa, the only thing we
And
weren't sure
Thursday's the first meeting, right? Yeah.
is if there is an end date to this appointment, or is it a committee that will stay?
It will
In place as
stay
long as it
until
needs
it
to.
finds a solution, which may be forever.
Okay.
Thanks
That
very
means
much.
you can't get off of it.
Yeah, it seems that way.
Yeah. Well, you fell for that.
All right.
See you Saturday.
Yeah, go to item 5, which is to accept 2 donations to the Middleton Food Bank from Bay Custom Homes for $500 and from the Jeff and Carol Kirby Foundation for $1,000.
I move we approve both with great thanks.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do we have the license manager?
I thought they were coming in, and obviously there's nobody here, so I don't know how the board wants to go forward with that. We can put it off to the 29th, but I don't know what that means, for their operation and for their, for the.
But I surely have, there's one question that I have on that, and more specifically, within the application, the vote that was taken by the corporate vote to change the manager doesn't have a date on it. I'm trying to find out when this change actually occurred.
Maybe the 29th.
So I
I don't know what to tell you.
would think that we would just put it off to the next.
Yeah, I
29th.
I can't remember this board ever doing a change of any kind of liquor license without someone being present.
I agree.
Okay, we will make it clear to them that they need to be present.
Okay. And the next agenda item is a review of a request of Richardson Green to change the status of land classified under Mass General Laws, Chapter 61A as agricultural.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recuse myself as having represented the petitioner.
Is there anyone here? Or
We actually didn't invite them for this because this is really a discussion for the board. We can certainly ask them to come at the next meeting. This is a parcel of land, if you look in the packet, that is roughly behind the new project that Warren Kelly recently built. It's a piece of land that is cut off from a larger piece of farmland off of River Street. The frontage is on River, but it wraps in around the commercial district along Route 114, South Main.
yeah, how big is the parcel?
The parcel is 111,000 square feet, so less than 3 acres.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, and, you know, at this point, you know, we have an opportunity to acquire at the change. So part of our vote is to decline our,
Be to exercise our option or to decline the option, or the right, yeah.
okay. So, and if we were to exercise it, it would be on the basis of fair market value,
Correct.
okay? So,
Do we have a fair market value assessment of what that property is?
We do not, no. It is landlocked, as you can see, which makes it a little challenging to value, or drives down the
or
value,
to use it.
or to use.
All right. So, yeah, at this point, I think, you know, the wisest course of action is to decline our option.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that, mainly for the fact that it's not abutted to anything that we presently own or would have any present plans to own. Some of the budding property is land that we wouldn't be able to use anyway, and then secondly, we don't have access to it. So, given that, as part of this filing, is there normally a companion piece of what that plan is to remove this from 61A, i.e. what their intentions are?
Yeah, it's part of a commercial development that's being proposed or being contemplated for the parcel 2 on this plan, which is owned by a related entity. I don't know that it's the same entity, but a related entity. And that parcel 2 has frontage on Forms Way, not Forms Way.
Rundlet.
Rundlet, as well as South Main.
And was this property at all, the parcels that were proposed but defeated at town meeting for rezoning was parcel 2 and others? Obviously not this parcel that we're,
That's correct.
Any other discussion?
no, I mean, as it stands, I don't have any opposition to waiving the right to acquire. And as I understand this, and as the land is laid out now, I would see no other need now or in the future for the town, so that portion I don't have a problem with at all.
Okay,
I would agree, Mr. Chairman.
so,
And do we have an idea of what the conversion of this to commercial use will trigger the rollback of the payment on taxes? Do we have an idea of what that number will be? So am I getting the understanding that this is before us tonight more for, to get the flavor of the town on this in terms of what our thoughts are on this, or is this something that the petitioner is looking for a timely disposition of by this board due to activities that they're moving forward on?
Well, the timelines under the statute are such that they have to, they can't assume, they can hope, but they can't really assume for much better than, I believe it's 120 days, the period for which the town can exercise its right. I don't have the rollback on this.
What is your recommendation, Andy?
Well, I think the land, the benefit of not exercising our right is beneficial to us on a revenue side, because it will allow some additional commercial development to take place, and provide us with some revenue that is certainly helpful as we manage our budgets year to year.
So are the only abutters to this property the existing other parcel and parcel 2?
And then the end of Cedar Ave, listed as Burke, up in this top corner.
Well, it doesn't look like parcel A even touches
Because of
Cedar
the,
Ave.
because there looks to be.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's
a-
right, there's that strip in there, right.
Yeah,
The
so,
remaining land, the 54 acres that is not being affected by this parcel A, is what abuts Cedar Avenue, and the other piece looks to be that small piece of Richardson Green, which is that small strip.
Right, and then at the bottom, right, River Street Commons, I believe is the Walgreens.
Yes, that's the Walgreens back parking lot.
We can ask the representatives to come in at the next meeting, Attorney Mann, or one of the attorneys from her office, and we can see if they're available, if the board would like more information or a deeper discussion.
yeah, there really, the way that parcel A is landlocked, so to try to acquire it for the town doesn't make sense, because we'd have no way of getting into it, and it's kind of off on its own. Taking 2 more weeks to think about it also, I think, is not a bad thing, and to have any questions answered, and about the rollback taxes, et cetera, and I would not think that 2 weeks would be a delay in anything that is being contemplated to be done with parcel A and parcel 2. So,
And I also think that it is a, we're not taking a formal vote on this evening, but I think it's likely the feeling of this board that we have no interest in a right to acquire that land, even though we have right of first refusal, because of the way we would be buying a piece of property surrounded with no access to it. So, I think that's obviously a logical, it's understood, but in no way does a 2-week request to the 29th mean that the town is in opposition. But just
Okay,
some
and I'll
of
make
those
that
areas,
clear to
yeah.
Attorney Mann.
Okay.
Thank you.
next is to review, accept, and authorize expenditure of the following community compact grants: human resources software, $25,000; inventorying and geocoding cemetery assets, $24,000.
So I talked, I forget, one of the meetings in December about the
It was
board.
the
had-
18th.
about the community compact grants and also about accepting grants and gifts. That's one of, grants particularly is one of the things that we haven't always done on a regular basis, so we're trying to get into that habit, get everybody into that habit. The community compact grants that, and Tanya is due all of the credit for these. She put the applications together and did the legwork to get the information that is needed. So again, for HR and HR software, and also for cemetery assets, mapping the information at the cemeteries and getting it on paper and out of people's heads where it's always at risk of being lost.
The HR software, will that require some town funds to fully do what is being contemplated?
Yeah, our initial, the initial amount quoted to us was 47,000 for all of the software that we wanted to buy.
That's through Munis.
That's through Munis, those are the additional modules, but we were able to get them down to around 37,000 total, so that would be about 12,000 over this grant amount, which we're looking at for the capital plan.
And when does this money, the grant money, need to be expended? By the end of the fiscal year?
The end of next fiscal year, so we've got
So we
well
can
over a
address
year.
this at the annual town meeting?
That's correct.
Yep.
So we're not doing this through a reserve fund?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
There is the possibility that we could just buy one module at a time, so we might actually start really soon and buy a couple of
How
modules.
many different modules are there?
I think it's a
in-
total of 5, so, and that would be a whole package, but since they implement them one at a time, we might just start and then.
Is there, if you implement over a staggered
Mm-hmm.
basis, does that draw out the cost in the process for training, or?
No, in fact, they want us to do it that way by knowing that we're going to buy them all. That's how they were able to bring the price down, but, yeah, they like to stagger them actually, so it works well.
Well, great job on the grant applications for this. Yeah, thank you.
So is there a motion?
I move that we accept and authorize expenditures on the community compact grants in the amount of $25,000 for the human resources software and $24,000 for the geocoding cemetery software.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, next is to appoint Gary Bent as Veteran Services Officer through June 30th, 2019.
I'll make.
If you recall, we appointed Gary for a 6-month appointment initially, and so now we'll
That's
just,
expired.
it's expired, and so we'll get him on through the rest of the fiscal year, and then do his renewal
Get 'em on a
with
regular
everybody
cycle,
else.
which will be a
Regular
3-year.
cycle, Correct.
I'll make the motion.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and then to appoint Jessica Solazzo as a member of the Recreation Commission through June 30th, 2019.
I move we approve. It's pretty exciting that she's somebody that, when she was young, started working at the rec program and has done a lot there, so she'll be a great addition to it.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, then we have a request from Jill Mann on behalf of Prime Cap LLC for the selectmen to vote its intent to lay out Lewis Drive as a public way per Mass General Laws, Chapter 82, Sections 21 to 24, and to refer the petitioner's request to the planning board for its recommendation per Mass General Laws, Chapter 41, Section 811.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Board of Selectmen approve its intent to lay out Lewis Drive Road as a public way and to refer it to the planning board for its recommendation.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And, we have to declare as surplus the 2007 Council on Aging van and authorize its disposal.
So we're trying to milk this old van a little bit longer. The intent all along has been to drive it into the ground, and when it stopped, we would get rid of it, so it has stopped. Blue Book value is something like $1,000, and to get it, to repair it, just to get it back on the road is about $1,500, so it didn't seem like a worthwhile investment.
So are we donating it to Cars for Kids?
We'll see what we can do. I don't know if they want vans, but it might be worth looking at.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we declare surplus the 2007 Council on Aging van and authorize its disposal.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Is there any new business anyone wants to bring up? All right. Andy, do we need the executive session?
Yeah, I think we can keep it pretty short, but I do want to bring the board up to speed on a couple of items related to land.
Okay, so we will have an executive session under general laws, chapter 30A, section 21A6, to consider the purchase, acquisition of or value of real property where the chairman declares discussion in open session would have a detrimental effect on the position of the town, and we would not be returning to open session. Rick, would you call the roll?
Okay, Selectman Hooton,
Aye.
Selectman Cresta,
Aye.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
and myself, yes.
All right, so we'll adjourn and not to return to open session.